Physically, I really did. And but I'm not a big planner when I write. I really want to be the kind of writer who plans, who has everything laid out, that has color-coded note cards ready to go, super organized, but that's just not me. So I didn't really have a plan for where the book was going to go. But I started out with a few characters. And then I said to myself, what would happen if I brought in some more people in this room? What would that look like? And that's really how the book started. So I really didn't have a very big picture perfect vision of a story I wanted to tell, but I just said to myself, what would happen if these people interacted and engaged with one another, and went from there.
Yeah, I thought it was an amazing quote as well. And I thought it summed up the book so well. So I wanted to lead with that. But I do think we should take a step back and understand a little bit more about you and your journey to writing. What did you set out to be an author from day one? Were you as a little kid scribbling in a notebook, or how did that all unfold?
Yes and no, I would say. I think growing up, I was always writing, but for me, it was a very personal thing. I wasn't shared. When I'd be done, that was it. Didn't share it with anyone. But at the same time, when I lost more of my hearing, I decided to become more immersed in the book world. And I was always reading because that was kind of an escape for me. And that was a place where I could access all information. So books were really important to me. But at the same time, I never really thought about becoming a writer. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. So when I went to college, I thought, okay, when I go to college, I am going to get a real job, J-O-B. And so that was my plan, that I would enter the world that way. But then I took a creative writing class, and I had strong encouragement from my professor, which really helped me to grow as a writer and start thinking of myself as a writer. I never really did that before up until that point. Yeah.
I heard you reference that you lost more of your hearing, and a lot of your characters in the story have different experiences with hearing and being deaf. If it's not too personal, can you tell us what your journey was like?
Really, I lost my hearing in middle school. So that's a bad time to become different.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think, honestly, I didn't know any other deaf people. So I thought of myself in a way like other hearing people thought of me, as a broken version of them.
Mm.
And it was like that for a while. And then I started talking with other deaf people, and I picked up ASL from them. And I realized, wait a second, I'm not a broken person. I'm just a different kind of person. And through that, I think that was the important part in what was the catalyst of me becoming a writer too. Because a lot of people sometimes think it's strange that I say ASL made me a writer because I write in English, obviously. And ASL honestly changed the way I thought about the world, about myself. And it gave me the confidence to understand that I have a story that's worth telling to other people. So that's another job that language has too.
I just want to pause for a second and welcome all the other new people that have joined us tonight. If you would like to ask a question, please feel free to use the chat window, or if you would like to ask it live, then by all means, please do. There's actually a raise your hand functionality if you would like to do that. But otherwise, I will continue. I have a lot of questions, so I can go all night, but don't worry, we won't. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the title. Loosely translated, True Biz means true story. Did you have that already in the story? Was it like part of the storyline and then you chose it, or was it vice versa?
Yeah, I always knew I wanted to call the book True Biz. And that's because I wanted deaf people to see right away and say, that's our book. I wanted them to see that and be able to say that. In the deaf community, that's a very familiar phrase. So I wanted them to instantly recognize the title. And yeah, at the same time, I think I had already written it in the book too. As a reader, I really liked that moment in the book where we see a title in the page itself. I love that moment. It helps you understand where that title came from and give that feeling to that reader too. But when it came time to publish the book, a lot of people had mixed feelings. They didn't necessarily want the title, so I had to fight for it. But I think it was worth it. I think it's the correct title for this book. And normally I'm not always really attached to a title personally. In my first book, I just did whatever. I said, yeah, call it whatever you want. But with this book, I felt a very strong connection to it. So it mattered to me.
Oh, that's really interesting. It's really interesting to know that, like, you don't, even just like from a publishing standpoint, that you don't get to necessarily name your book.
Yeah, it is weird. It is interesting. We don't have a lot of control over that part of the process. The title, the cover, normally we don't typically. The way that it's marketed, distributed, and things like that. And people in the publishing world were concerned about the title. And I said, well, what if they said things like, what if people thought of this as a business book, they thought. And I thought, well, maybe we need a better cover if they think that.
Joanne, I'll unmute you. And I'll bring you down here.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm very curious about the cover of the book. I noticed differences in England to here in America, but both had sign or True Biz on the cover. So did you get some say with that?
It's always really interesting to me, that process, when the book is translated or even published in another country and gets a new cover. And most of the time it gets a new cover. It is really cool to see a different interpretation of the book. Sometimes, like with the UK, they ask me, hey, what do you think? They'll ask me and they'll show me, what do you think about this? But sometimes in other countries, they don't. They print it and it's out there. And it's bye-bye. But I really liked both covers, the one in the UK and the one in the US. I liked the way that the US cover uses the hand shape for true. It's the start of the full sign of True Biz. And I think the front is really cool, the art design. But I don't have a lot of control, no, to answer your question. Maybe I can say yes or no, or that's it. Like with the US cover, for example, the first time that they showed it to me, it was sort of the same, but a different background. The background was yellow, it was a bright yellow. And I said, no, I can't really see this. This is a little bit straining on the eyes. It's a little too bright. So we were able to adjust the background color, but still the idea of the design remained the same.
Thank you, Joanne, for your question. So Jody, before I ask yours, I have another question about, so the pages in between the story itself, the ones where we learn real and important information about the deaf community and the politics surrounding it are both fascinating and infuriating, but so aptly delivered. Can you discuss why you decided to include those a little bit more?
Yes, I always knew I wanted to include the pictures with the signs, but I was not planning to include the history part. And that was for a while until I gave a draft to my editor. And she's a really smart woman. She is a very cool woman. She is amazing at her job. And yet, she still had no idea what I was talking about in that part of the story of the draft. So she gave it back to me with many questions. And at first, I sat down with that feeling of just frustration. I felt a little bit resistant. I didn't want to have to explain myself. I just wanted to write a good story, like any other hearing person would be allowed to do. So, but then after a while, after more thinking, I came to the realization and said, okay, if I want people to be able to empathize with these characters, then they have to understand the history. They have to understand the context. And so I decided to use, well, because the book happens in school, I decided to take advantage of that setting and go ahead and use those pages as a way to teach people some information about the deaf community and yet still be separate from the story itself. So yeah.
And Donetta here has said it perfectly. The history parts were some of her favorite sections, and thank you for including them. I would agree with that.
Thank you.
So back to Jody's question here. It is a very good question and one that we always love to know because we feel like when you get that call, like I would love to be a fly on the wall when somebody gets the call that their book has been picked up by Reese's book club. Yeah, we're always fascinated by Reese. So if you could tell us anything about that experience.
Oh, it was really crazy. So basically, I did know that my publisher submitted the book to her team because we had discussed things beforehand about the plans and what they had intended to do with the book. They said, we will be sending this to Good Morning America and the book club. And then they said, listen, I told them, listen, I have seen before Reese Witherspoon's book club, and it's the only book that's ever mentioned disability. So her book club is always is the only place that I've ever seen that mentions disability as a part of diversity in the book club world. So I was thinking, well, maybe let's try and send it to them just to see what happens. And I think maybe the marketing people were a little bit apprehensive, but obviously they ended up sending it in anyway. So when it happened, I think we were told in December or early, the book didn't release until April. So it was a big secret for a long time. And I remember the day it happened, I got an email from the publishing team. And they said, we need to have a meeting. They said nothing else. So I got there on our Zoom meeting and 15 of them popped up right there on the screen. I was like, oh my God, they're firing me. Instead, they said, Reese Witherspoon picked your book. And I freaked out, obviously. But I couldn't tell anybody for 4 months.
Were you allowed to tell your family?
I told my partner, but I didn't tell my parents because I can't trust my mom to not say anything.
That would be a hard secret to keep. I agree.
Yes, and I didn't want to piss off Reese Witherspoon. Come on now.
Fair. All right. So the next question we have. So you discuss BASL and how it differs from ASL and how important was it to include this and the history of ASL in the book and the differences between the two.
Yes, I think it is really important. I think it's one of the best things about our community is that the deaf community is really diverse.
Mm-hmm.
And we arrive to this community from all sorts of backgrounds, ethnicities, races, sexual orientation, classes, everything. And we all coexist through language in that community. And so that was a really cool thing and a very important thing about our community. But at the same time, we are also a community that exists in America, and we have the same types of problems that everywhere else in America experienced.
Right.
So I think it was important to show that. I also think it's important to be specific in as far as character of Charlie, specifically for her journey, because she arrives to the deaf school thinking, okay, now I'm safe. this is the perfect place for me. I finally fit in somewhere and it's perfect. And yet she sees it's not really true for everyone there.
Mm-hmm.
So
Ladies, just another, want to remind you, if you want to ask a question, you're welcome to do it live. Thanks, Joanne, for doing that. And if you want to pop a question into the chat window, then please feel free. And I'll make sure that those get asked, or you can ask them yourself. Just don't want to miss your opportunity here. So you've been quoted saying that as a deaf writer, that makes you a better writer. I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
I think knowing more than one language can always make you a better writer in general, because you have more perspective interrelationally and about the world. And I think ASL specifically really helped the language as far as the storytelling, because it is a visual language. And when I'm writing, I'm thinking about things in 3D space, and I'm able to put that on the page. I think also because when we sign, we use our whole body. And for me anyway, I feel like that changes the way I connect with other people, relate to people, and relate to the language, because I need to back up my own words through my body language, you know. And I think that translates to paper too.
We do have some live questions here for you. Heather, I'll ask you to unmute.
Hi, I'll keep my video off just because I have really slow internet, so it may freeze if I use my video. I have a question about the ending of the book where February turns her back on the kids committing, well, basically terrorism with the bombs that they made. I loved the book. I found it very, very intriguing. One of my caregivers I had for when my children were small, both her and her husband were hearing, but both their children were born deaf. And then those children, when they became adults, had children that were hearing. So I was exposed to the world a little bit through them. But anyway, in terms of the book itself, I had that question around why, Sara, you chose, like, I understand it was in reference, or kind of in reference to part of the historical part you had referenced, and then just to voice their protest. But I'm just wondering if some people found that a bit extreme, and why you chose to choose that. And in terms of February turning her eye on it, these are teenagers. People could have been hurt. It's criminal, basically, what they did. So I'm wondering if you can address that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think people make bad choices all the time. And I don't think that that choice was a good choice. But I do think that that choice was in and of itself violent, but it was also a response to violence. And this is what happens when you experience that. People over the generations, I think we've seen this throughout history. And Charlie and Elliot experienced violence on their own bodies too, right? So I don't think for me personally, I don't think it was the appropriate way to respond. That's what I think, but that is coming from their perspective. And I think they're seeing it as a response to violence that's already happened and is happening to them. And if we look back to the start of the book, we already knew that February is willing to be violent to connect to the deaf community. That's always been in her. So, not a good thing, but that's the character.
Thank you, Heather, for asking your question. Nikki.
Hey, so I had actually, sorry, I have baby sleeping. I had this as an audiobook like back when it first came out. And then this time around I had the actual physical book. So it was interesting to have sort of these two very different experiences. One, of course, not being like the irony of having an audiobook for a book that's largely about like deaf community and deaf culture and, you know, ASL. But also the audiobook, something I found really interesting was that they actually explained in the beginning that while you're listening to the book, you hear them signing anytime there's ASL dialogue, which is something obviously I've never had in any other audiobook. And I was wondering if you A, knew about this, B, had kind of any say in it, I guess. I just thought it was like a really interesting artistic choice, let's say. But actually now I'm really glad that I read the book with like the print version, because I really enjoyed, yeah, seeing the signs and instead of having them described and then sort of getting a lot more context. But yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, that's actually me signing in the book.
Okay.
So, but no, it's a good question because that was something that I actually woke up in the middle of the night and said, oh my God, how are they going to make this an audiobook? And I wrote a crazy email. I emailed it to my editor. And she wrote me back and said, okay, we will meet up. We will have a meeting. We'll discuss the audiobook with the team. So we ended up doing that. And so their team, the idea that they had was to do that, to hear the sign language, to add that underneath the dialogue so that people could hear the difference between what's spoken and what's signed. But it was funny because when they were explaining it to me, they said, well, we want to use the sound of sign language. And I said, can you elaborate, please? And then they sent me a video. And they said, like this. I watched the video. And I was watching someone sign. I didn't understand what they were trying to say. So we went back and forth more in depth about it. And they said the movements of the body, the hands with the clothes, you know, whatever. I said, okay, I mean, that's true. Yeah, that makes sense. And then they told me, wear loud clothes. What does that mean? So it was funny. It was a big learning curve for all of us involved, but it was really fun that I was able to get involved in the creation of that audiobook, because obviously I never have been involved in that type of process, and I wasn't involved in that type of process in my first book. Didn't really think about being involved at all. So
I love that. Thank you. That's adjacent to like, what is it like to be deaf?
Yeah, I mean, now, I've been deaf for a long time, much longer than I've been hearing now. So I don't know. Yeah, it feels normal.
Yeah, right. No, it's a wild thing to ask. It's like people who are twins and they're like, what is it like to be a twin? Like, what is it like not to be a twin? You know, like it's just the most. Anyway, thanks.
It's too funny.
Thank you, Nikki. I I understood that you weren't actually asking her what it was like to be deaf, right? You were just saying that that was like a similar example
Yeah,
of,
like wear loud clothes or like,
yeah, wear
you
loud
know,
clothes.
the
What's it like?
sounds of signing.
Yeah.
Gee, thanks.
Okay, Jill.
Hi, sorry. I mostly have a comment and a question. One thing I wanted to say was I really appreciated that while I picked this book up as a fiction book, I actually think I learned a lot from it, and I took a lot of like personal development from it. Specifically about learning about ASL, I think it's maybe hopefully helped me be a little bit of a better patient advocate in my like daily work life, advocating for, I see like quite a few deaf patients and helping make sure that they get the proper translation services. We have like a big issue in our clinic with whether audio visual versus in-person translators should be used for medical interpretation and how to go about doing that. And so I think learning from you about how ASL isn't just what's happening with your hands, it's happening with your whole body and your facial expressions and your eyebrows and everything like that, I think really helps me think of ASL as I don't know, something like more of culture, more of something that requires an in-person translator rather than, you know, the deficits that might be surrounding audiovisual. So I think that if you don't get told this a lot, this actually, I think, has really helped me with personal growth and professional growth. So I really appreciated that from that perspective. My specific question is about the future of the characters and whether you're planning to write any books in the future with the same characters or specifically Charlie in the future.
Well, first, thank you so much. I'm really happy to hear that it gave you that different perspective, especially in the healthcare field. It is really tough for deaf people to get access to healthcare in that way. And then for the book's future and the character's future, I don't really have a plan to write more. You know, some people feel frustrated about the ending of this book because I didn't really wrap it with a bow. And I understand from that perspective of the reader why there is frustration there. But at the same time, that was also the goal. I actually wanted people to think about exactly what it means not to have a happy ending for these people. Because these events literally happen all over the country and all over the world. Schools are shutting down, deaf schools. So what I say is, if you want a happy ending for these characters, the onus is on you to support us and advocate us and help make it happen for the deaf community out there. For Charlie, from my perspective, I think she has agency for the first time in her life. She has a full language for the first time in her life. So I think this book is just the beginning for her in her journey.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank you.
All right, so I do have a few more questions. I would like to discuss point of view a little bit. You actually change point of view in the book, and that's really effective. And especially when we learn about Charlie's mother, it's really an interesting part of the book. So I was just wondering if you could expand on your decision to change the way that you told the story.
Right. So I had always written the book from 4 perspectives. And now the book that you have, I ended up deleting a lot of Elliot's perspective. I wrote 100 more pages of Elliot's perspective that I ended up taking out. But in the course of writing the book, and my vision for the book was that we had 4 character perspectives and point of views. So when I started writing the book, I had no kids. Now I have 2. And so in the course of becoming a mom, I started thinking about ways to show people Charlie's mom. She's not a bad person. She thinks she's doing the best thing for her kid. She's wrong. That happens. She's also a typical parent of a deaf child. Most parents of deaf children do not learn sign language. 8% actually learn. So in all honesty, she's a normal picture of what that looks like. But I thought, okay, what is the best way to make sure that everything is seen and understood as far as that she's not evil? She's not. So I thought, okay, I will let her speak for herself. And she's the only character in the book who speaks in the first person as well. So she's the first chapter I wrote outside of those 4 other point of views. And then other people were added later. But for this one, it was an important moment for people to understand and to let her explain herself and to show that she is trying her best.
That's like 8%. That's so mind-boggling. I feel like if they read, like, I feel like there's so much perspective in the book that like I have 2 children, and I'd like to think that I would learn ASL, but I feel like I know I would have after I read your book if I had a child, a deaf child. So I feel like it must have changed, or it must have helped. I can't imagine not being able to communicate with my child. Sorry, I'm like just thinking of what you've said now.
Yes, it's bad. I mean, there is a lot of misinformation that's given out to parents.
Mhm.
And there is a lot of fear.
Yeah.
But I hope things can change, because now more than ever, people have access to information.
Yeah.
They have it online. They have access to each other. And I think parents more and more now are really trying to reach out to deaf adults and deaf professionals to learn from us. So
Rosemary has just said here that she's recommended, this is more praise than anything, but she's recommended your book to everyone she knows. And it's one of her favorite books of the year. And you really made her think about a utopia where everyone learned sign language as a child.
oh, thank you. You know, there are a few places where that happens. Martha's Vineyard. And there are a few other areas as well where they have a high population of genetically deaf individuals. And everyone there signs, whether you're deaf or whether you're hearing.
Oh, wow.
And deaf is suddenly not a disability anymore.
Yeah. So this is I got this question quite a lot. If you had any recommendations for other books that will help our community continue to learn about the deaf community in ASL, whether that's through fiction or if there's nonfiction that you recommend specifically.
Yes, I have a whole list. Maybe I can send that.
Yeah,
or
totally.
post it.
I would love to post that everywhere.
Perfect. Perfect. Yes, there are more and more deaf writers out there now. It's a very exciting time.
Awesome. Okay, well, stay tuned for that then. And Judy does have a question. So I have a couple wrap-up questions, but Judy, I'll let you ask your question.
Okay. So, hello, Sarah. I've been in the field, I've been in the field of deafness for, I don't know, 22 years or so. I've been an employment specialist and I'm currently an interpreter. And reading your book, I told my interpreter friends, I'm like, this gal hits all the marks. It's just, I can't believe how, so I've been learning about this for 22 years or whatever, as a hearing person, but you hit so many marks. I mean, so many issues. I don't know. I'm just amazed at how you organized the book, how you got it all together in one place. So thank you so much for doing that. It's like the other gal was saying, I mean, there's a story, an amazing story, but also all the education you did and advocacy work and so on. It's really incredible. So I think everyone should read it. It's exciting. So thanks.
Thank you so much. I feel a little bashful, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Judy. So to wrap up, Sarah, we would love to know what's coming next. If you're working on anything you can tell us about, or if Reese is bringing this to the silver screen.
I hope so. I do. I mean, right now, we are actually in the beginnings of developing a TV series with actor Millie Simmons.
Okay.
She is from A Quiet Place, the Quiet Place movie, and she is the perfect person to play as Charlie. So I do hope we make it.
Yeah.
I think it would be a bit of a fight because Hollywood is just not used to telling deaf stories. And right now we are seeing more and more deaf characters coming in and hearing stories, playing and hearing stories, but we have not seen a deaf story yet. So I don't know, we'll see. I'm hopeful. So now we need to wait for the second strike
Right.
to end eventually, and then from there we can see where it goes. But I am currently writing another book. It's nonfiction.
Mhm.
And so I have two sons. One is 4, the other is 5. One is hearing, so he is a coda. His first language is ASL. The other is hard of hearing, and he was born in Thailand. He lived in an orphanage from birth till age 4.
Wow.
And so his language access was very limited there. We adopted him, and just like that, his language skyrocketed.
Wow.
He's picked it up so fast. He's bilingual. He can speak and he can sign.
Amazing.
But so with this book I'm writing it as half as a letter to my son, my hearing son, and then half as a letter to my hard of hearing son. Sort of like a memoir with some history and some other information all wrapped up into one.
That sounds amazing.
That's what I'm doing now anyway.
Do you know, like, is it going to be published soon, or is it you're still in the process of writing and selling and all that fun stuff?
No, so I had both books at the same time.
Oh,
Well, Random House
Yeah.
purchased both at the same time. And do I have to do it?
right. Well, we will look forward to that for sure. That's very exciting. And it
Thank you.
sounds like an incredible story as well with your 2 children. I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, so I can relate to your where you are in the child rearing phase.
Whew, it's a
Yeah.
hurricane.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Massive thank you to Sara for writing such an incredible novel in the first place, and then for joining us tonight. And we also really, really do hope that that makes that through Hollywood. I know how volatile Hollywood is, but it would be such an incredible series if it gets on the big screen. So we hope to see that. Also, Jen, you're amazing. You're amazing. Thank you so much for all your incredible
True Biz.
and yeah, and that's everything. So we'll get this posted and get it live and be able to share it with our community. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you all so much for coming.
Good night.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Erin. Good
Thank
night.
you all very much. It was great. Thanks.